Good evening, my friends. I hope you're doing well. So this is the second episode of my Godzilla hype series leading up to Godzilla King of the Monsters, the movie that's coming out next week that I've been flailing about for well over a year. I am so unbelievably excited about it, and my hype has been boosted considerably because last night the original motion picture soundtrack was released, and I spent most of the night listening to it, and I spent all day listening to it. So I decided that I would do a review because, well, that's, what I do sometimes. But I absolutely loved the soundtrack. It made me feel and recapture the wonder that I experienced as a kid listening to all of those different classic soundtracks from the older Godzilla films, whether they be the Showa-era Godzilla films, the Heisei-era Godzilla films, or even the more recent Millennium series. Godzilla movies are very well known for their beautiful soundtracks, and this movie does not disappoint in that regard at all whatsoever. The soundtrack is 26 tracks long altogether, which it's a pretty sizable soundtrack for a movie of its length. But the thing about this soundtrack is that it does a lot of fan service. Throughout the entire soundtrack, we get Godzilla's classic theme throughout the entire Godzilla series. It makes a return. Mothra's theme makes a return as well. So composers like Akira Ifukube and Yuji Koseki, Ifukube, who is well known for producing many different compositions for Godzilla films, and Yuji Koseki, who composed and wrote the original Mothra song and Mothra film, they would be proud of this soundtrack because it pays them so much respect, and that really makes me happy as a fan, and that's something that I think we've been craving a lot in Godzilla films, because in the Godzilla 2014 film, we didn't get any classic themes that made a return, although the composition for that film is pretty good, though, in its own right. But again, this soundtrack is pretty sizable, but we see the different themes for the specific monsters or characters occurring frequently. Godzilla, Mothra, and Ghidorah's themes all occur throughout at least 5 tracks. Rodan's theme occurs less so, just a couple tracks, but his initial track, titled Rodan, is actually probably one of the longer tracks in the entire composition. Personally, as a Mothra fan, I am unbelievably satisfied with this entire soundtrack because her classic theme for the Mothra song is reused consistently, and it's coined as this type of very beautiful flute playing, kind of almost like this kind of native flute sounding, or this type of Eastern sounding flute. And one of my favorite moments in the entire soundtrack is in the track titled Battle for Boston, which happens much, much later. There is a moment where this very rigorous battle theme transitions into this beautiful moment. It's only 15 seconds where Mothra's theme happens, and it broadens into this beautiful choral crescendoed tidbit with horns and violins playing in the background. It was it made me cry, not gonna lie, but then again, I'm watching this movie because Mothra is my queen, we all know that. What's interesting is that while Bear McCreary keeps Godzilla and Mothra's classic themes, there are original themes composed for Rodan and Ghidorah. Rodan's theme is more of a percussively rigorous theme. It sounds a little bit chaotic. Out of all of the main character themes, I would say that Rodan's is my least favorite, because at first when I listened to it, it sounded all over the place. Although now that I listen to it more and more, I understand that it is mostly representative of his character. I'm assuming his character is going to be very chaotic, very neutral, very wishy-washy with, allegiances. So it would make sense that the sound of the actual track would reflect that. Now, Ghidorah's theme is very interesting. It has a lot of these very Tibetan-sounding, Gregorian-type voices chanting in the background, and of course it leads into some darker horn tones and darker stringed tones, all of which lends us to believe that, Ghidorah is very imposing, and I think that those tracks do very well, and again, I will tout the track battle in Boston, because I very rarely see musical scores weave together all of their different themes in a very smoothly transitional way. In that track, we hear Godzilla's classic theme, we hear Mothra's, we hear Rodan's, we hear Ghidorah's, and they all fade in and out of each other. All in all, it was very invigorating for me. But I'd have to say, and of course, you know I was going to probably say this because Mothra's my favorite, I think that they did a phenomenal job capturing Mothra's majesty in these tracks. There, again, I'll say there were 5 tracks that use Mothra's theme. All of them display her majesty, her power, and in a way, her imposing characteristics in some different ways. There's a track called Queen of the Monsters that it's almost like this heroic type of march sounding, especially later on. But there's also another track called The Larva, which is more so like a slow piece. We get, of course, the Mothra song, which is the last track of the entire soundtrack, which, in my opinion, they saved the best for last, because for me, not only did it steal the show because it's my favorite character, but I feel like they took a theme that was kind of intending to be operatic originally, and they turned it into something unbelievably sweeping and soaring, but still retaining a lot of its tribal characteristics. I thought it was wonderful. So, as a Mothra fan, if Barry McCreary and Mike Doherty, if you're watching this, you definitely made me happy. But aside from that, a couple of downsides to the soundtrack, I would have hoped they would have kept some more classic tunes. Like, I was hoping they would do a new version of the Monster Zero March. That's one of my favorite ones. But I understand, like, sometimes legalities come into play when it comes to, you know, gaining rights to classic musical pieces. But at the same time, I know a lot of people have also been expressing frustration over hearing the type of tribal-sounding voice chants over a lot of the soundtrack, particularly in Godzilla's theme. It happens very frequently. It didn't bother me, but I can see why people would find it distracting from Ifukube's original intent. Now, here is my perspective on that. I think that they overlaid, or McCreary chose to overlay those voices, or that choir, those choral segments, because it creates a more primal feel to Godzilla, a primal feel to all of the creatures, and I think this entire soundtrack's use of choral sounds was wonderful. That kind of gave it more of that, like, larger-than-life feel, which to me was very effective. All in all, I give this soundtrack an A-. It was almost perfect in my opinion, but I was hoping that it would have utilized a few more classic sounds. And while I wasn't super a huge fan of Rodan's theme, I understand why they chose to go that route. But again, I'm happy that Mothra's theme and Godzilla's theme turned out as wonderfully as they did. If you've not purchased the soundtrack yet, you can find links to it in my description section of this video. If you're a Godzilla fan, or if you've listened to the soundtrack, please share your thoughts in the comment section below. I would very much enjoy having conversations about this with everyone. Anyway, thank you all for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful night. Bye.